Right, we're just going to go in on this camera. So I'm going to paint along with you guys this evening. So we're going to do this step by step, but this is what we're aiming for. So once your beautiful platters have been fired, this is the kind of thing that we're going to be aiming towards. Now, obviously, everyone will do their own version of this because it doesn't matter. Even if I said to you, you have to put your dots here, 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 and here, they will all look a little bit different. So once we get going and you understand what we're up to, all of your trees can look a little different. The actual original that I was working from had one tree in green, one tree in red, and then one that had the mixture. But to be honest, I'm a little bit obsessed with dots, so I went all out and I just carried on dotting. So when we get to that part of the design, it's really going to be artist choice. You guys can do. But before we get going, I'm just going to double check you've all got everything you should have in your kit. So you should have one of our large sushi plates. You should have 2 pots of black in these little pots like this. You should have the same pot but in blue. There won't be as much in that one. And then 3 squeezy bottles. One's white, one's red. They don't look as bright in the bottles, but I promise you they're the colours that we've got on here. You should also have a template and a fan brush. Now, I might just send you all off on a little wild goose chase around your house, which is actually what I've just had. But we're going to need a pair of scissors. So we didn't write that in our instructions. Apologies for that. But you're going to need a pair of scissors because we're going to need to cut these out. And I would recommend having a bowl of water as well. So if you all need to go and do a mad dash to get a pair of scissors, then you're very, very welcome to.
Thank you.
Good timing.
Perfect. Brilliant. So Pip is in the top corner. It looks like she's doing her own painting, actually. I don't know if you're doing this design, are you, Pip? Doing something different. Perfect. She's on something else. But she is here to keep an eye on you guys, because obviously when I'm painting with you, I've often got my head down and I'm working on the project at the same time. So I concentrate a lot on this kind of overhead view. But if you've got any problems at all, often you're muted out, or you're able to mute yourself, or even turn your video off if you want to.
Yeah.
But if you've got
Just keep it well away from the laptop, okay?
Anything like that, or say stop, or can you repeat it, or anything, or just call out to me, because if you just stop me in my tracks, that's not a problem at all. We kind of try and treat this as if we're all in the studio together, although this is obviously very different. But thank you again, though, for joining us tonight. Okay, so let's get started. I think the first thing we need to do is get 3 coats of black onto our glaze, onto our paints. Now, when we talk about painting in the studio, we always drum it in that you have to do your lightest colours first. You know, it's light colours first, then add your dark colours. Only use black last because black spoils everything. It's all of that kind of thing. But actually, we're going to do the opposite on this one. And that's what gives it this really kind of dark, sort of starry night finish on there. We're adding these beautiful light colours over the top. We're going to
This screen to make it look kind of
vibrant white coming in. Purely for the design that we're doing, but it's not something I would normally recommend. I would normally say avoid painting your pottery black first and then adding colours, because it's unlikely to work. So just to bear that in mind. Obviously, doing a project like this, it works brilliantly, but if you're just doing pottery painting at home, please avoid painting it black first, unless you're going to want it to look really, really dark. So what we're going to do is start off, I will just move that aside, but if you guys need to see it when we get on to working on the trees, I can bring it back into view a bit better. So we're going to start off with painting the front of our plates. Now, the idea is this evening is that we want to work together in getting these fronts done. We do need to paint the back of our plates as well. They are solid on the back too, but that can be done either later on this evening once your dots are dry, or tomorrow. So we're going to work just on the front at the moment. With your fan brush, the idea is that the fan brush, for those of you that haven't done a recent Zoom call with us, they get a lot of glaze on in a really nice even finish. So it's designed to give you nice kind of even.
That's a nice colour.
The best way to use it when we use foundation glaze, which is this way, is to fully load your paintbrush with water first, and then add that fully loaded brush into that pot. So you're mixing your water in. So you're just going to slowly mix that around. And then when you're using your fan brush, you want to make sure that's properly mixed. But you want to make sure your fan brush is fully loaded. So you kind of start painting when it stops dripping. Try not to do this to it, because if you wipe it all on the edge to then make it more manageable, you've actually got rid of all of that glaze that you're holding. So we're going to go for a fully loaded paintbrush, and then we're going to do really long, lovely sweeping strokes. Now you'll see when it first goes on, there'll be little bits that get missed, but don't worry about those. We'll catch up with them as we come back and do our next coats. So you want it to feel like you're painting with silk. You want it to kind of glide really smoothly. It's going to go on and have this really nice kind of feel to it. As soon as it drags and makes a noise, you need to reload. So this is what we're going for at the moment. As I say, don't worry about little patches that are being missed, little kind of brush strokes. We're going to get those on the next coat. So that there is one coat on mine. Now you'll see where I went up with my paintbrush, it had more glaze. And as I came back down, it was emptying out, but it still has one coat on. What I'm going to do for my next coat is just turn my plate around so that I'll go in the opposite direction. We need to wait for those to dry. So glaze dries really quickly into bisque because it's so porous. It just pulls all that liquid straight through. So we're just going to let them dry. You'll know when it's completely dry, when it has lost its shine. So obviously this bit here has still got a shine to it, but this is all coming in quite dry here. It doesn't leave anything on your fingers. So just let that lose its shine, and then we'll go for our second coats going the other way. I forgot to say at the beginning, all of our glazes are washable and they're non-toxic. So if you accidentally get this anywhere, if it goes on your table, if you drop it on the carpet, if it's on your clothes, it'll all come off. Just some warm water will get rid of it. So you don't need to add water when you go back in for your second coat because you've already got that mixed in with this glaze. So you don't want to add water each time. It was just on the first load. And you'll see when you start painting your second coat, don't worry if you're not quite at that stage yet. But when you start doing it, it will cover your plate much better. It's going to look a lot neater already. So coat number 2 really brings it together, and then coat number 3 just kind of finishes that off beautifully. Now you have enough glaze in here to do more than 3 coats on the front and the back of your plate. So if you're finding that this is going on really, really thick and it's taking a long time to dry, you might not need to be doing 3 coats, but we're going for nice even coats like that. So once you start getting across your plate, it's drying on those first bits there. I've got no areas that would drip if I was to hold that up. And just as a little idea, that's how much glaze I've got left in this pot. When we finish with this project and this goes in the kiln, we don't dip glaze these, which is why we're using a foundation glaze. So normally in the studio, everything that you would paint would go through our clear dipping glaze bucket. That just makes sure that the piece is completely covered in glaze. It would then make sure it's food safe and it's a usable piece once it's fired. Now, because we're doing 3 coats on the front and the back, and then these dots are going to be quite thick, we don't really want to add another layer of glaze, because the more you put on, the higher chance there is of there being issues. So one of which would be crawling, which is where the glaze kind of pulls away from itself and leaves patches of bisque exposed. The other one would be shivering, which is where it just clean comes off the plate. So you'll have big patches where the kind of glaze, once it's been fired, so the glass covering all kind of shears and comes away. Or worst case scenario, cracking of the pottery. So just to bear that in mind, when we're painting this, we don't want to see any plate left. So while your second coat is drying, I'll just show you on mine. We've got a proper edge to these plates. They're a beautiful chunky plate. And we want to make sure that this edge here also has 3 coats of glaze. Now, if you pulled your paintbrush across like that, you'll empty it out and you'll get a drip that comes in underneath. But instead of doing that, just get a little bit of colour on it, and you find that if you gently kind of paint round it, you'll then get your colour on there without leaving any big blobs each side. Oh, sorry, I hit the stand. So what we're going to do just while your second coat is drying is just work our way all the way around the plate and give this edge a first coat of black glaze. As I say, these aren't going to be dipped, so we just need to make sure that everything is covered. The other thing we don't like doing with platters is firing them more than we have to. So once these go in the kiln, the idea is that they're fired once and then that's it, they safely come back to you. There is a higher chance of cracking when you're working on a bigger piece. So it's best to make sure that all of the kind of base work, the foundation work, is done really well, so we don't have to look into firing it multiple times. And when you come to doing your third coat, when it's ready, obviously this second coat will take a little bit longer to dry just because it's got that first coat underneath it. You can either turn it again like we did at the beginning, or you can paint again on the top of in the same direction that you did before. Now I've still got some shiny patches. I'm just going to wait for those to go before I start again. Another reason why we wait for that is if you start painting over a shiny patch, so wet glaze, you're basically just moving that wet glaze around. You actually need each layer to completely dry and set up against the bisque so that it is a true layer in its own right, I suppose. If you just start painting over it before it's dry, it will just move the glaze around, so you'll end up with kind of streaky backgrounds. So it is worth just waiting a little bit. So when your plate is ready, go for your third coat on there. And then again, whilst that's drying, you can go for your second coat going around the edge just to make sure that edge is covered too. The plates are really heavy, so if you're struggling with kind of holding it in one hand and painting with the other, you can either prop it up against something or just wait completely until we've done this bit. But when you come to doing the back, either later on tonight or tomorrow, just remember you've got to do your edges too. Almost treat them as a whole side on their own rather than it just being the front and the back of the plate. I tend to be able to balance it on my hands, but my hands are huge, so it doesn't seem to affect me with the weight of the plate. But if you're struggling with it, that's something that you can come back to, just remembering how many coats you've popped on there. So I'm just going to go for my third coat now. Now you'll notice when this glaze is drying, it dries grey. This is our darkest black. It's a true black once it's fired, so I don't think I've gone mad and given you all the wrong colour. I've now used up my first pot of black. So see how much you've got in your paintbrush, but you may well need to just dip into your second pot to go around the edge, depending on how your black is going. Often when we're doing a workshop like this, we'll paint the back at the same time. But I did do that with mine, and I ended up having to go back and touch the corners up of these sushi plates, because when you tip it, it's just on those points. And we've never really noticed it with our kind of other platters, our big round platters and things, that they lose their edge. Whereas this, because it's so kind of localized where the pressure goes through, it seems to take the corners clean off. So it's one of the reasons why we're not going to be painting the backs now while we wait. Otherwise we'll spend all evening just turning these plates backwards and forwards, trying to make sure they've got enough black everywhere as we're merrily rubbing it off on the tables. So once your third coat is on and you've done your second coat of your edge, you can just set that aside to dry, and then we're just going to cut out our 3 trees and our moon. Go on the line, you don't need to leave a gap or anything. This is then the shape that you're going to use. Obviously, if you wanted your trees to be bigger, or you want to add a 4th tree, then just use your other paper and kind of work your way around. But for those of you that are just going for something very similar to what we've done already, just cut your trees and your moon out.
If you start your second pot of black glaze, do you dip your brush in the water again?
Yeah, so if you're needing that, then yes, you do need to do 1 load of kind of water, so like a brush load of water into that pot, and then give it a good mix.
Thank you.
So we're going to use, don't panic, I'm not going to jump ahead, but just explaining what we're up to. We're going to use our paper cutouts as like a masking technique. So you can use things like stickers and masking tape and things like that when you're trying to block out a pattern. But obviously we've got our glaze on here, and although it's now touch dry, or it's getting there, you're not going to be able to stick anything on there. So the masking tape and stickers would just lift straight back off again. There's a message Pip just popped up. Sorry, I was distracted. So what we're going to do is use the paper. Now, obviously, if you just lay that on there and you start painting over the top, it's just going to come away. So we're actually going to stick this down into our glaze that we've done here. Now, with your paintbrush that we were using before, you have to wait for this to dry completely, because as I said before, we want this to truly set up against the bisque. If you just stuck paper into wet glaze, when you then come to peel that off later on, it will just pull all of that glaze off underneath. So it's going to strip that base glaze away. But because we want this to be a food safe piece, we need that glaze to be as thick as it is now, basically, once it's fired. So you want it to have this real true kind of solid black coming through in the background. Now, to make that happen, we're going to rehydrate the sections that we want to stick the trees into. So just have a little play now without anything on there, and position your trees and get them where you want them to be. Now, obviously, the idea is that you've got the larger tree is in the forefront, and then you've got the smaller one looking a bit further away, so you can kind of make it look like you're looking through the woods. But it's entirely up to you. You don't have to copy this, but it just gives you an idea. But what I did on this one as well is just hid the base of one of them kind of coming in behind another. Again, you don't have to. You could have these as 3 very separate trees because there's plenty of space on your plate. But just have a little play with how you want it to be. And then you're also going to position where you want your moon to be as well. Again, that can go anywhere. So you don't have to copy mine exactly, but just to give you a bit of an idea of what you're aiming for. So have a bit of a play, a bit of a kind of move around, see roughly where you want them to go. And then with your brush, it can be completely clean, or you can just use it with the black glaze on it. It doesn't really make any odds. What we're going to do, I'll show you with one and then I'll get you guys going, is I'm just putting a little bit of, you can't really see, let me move that onto there. So I'm just dipping it in and then I'm just getting most of that out. So it's just then a damp paintbrush. It's not going to kind of drip all over the place. And so with this little one here, I know I roughly want it there. So I'm just going to do some really light brush strokes where I want it to go. And then I'm also going to just wet the back of my paper. Now, paper that's wet does this. It curls up, it crinkles, it doesn't want to be wet. But you're going to just then position that straight, as straight as you can, and then lay it down into the glaze. Now, we don't want to overwork the edges because now that's wet again, it'll all come off on your fingers. But the idea is you will then press and spend a bit of time just sinking that into that glaze. Now I just want to show you how it's going to look initially. Now this is sometimes really hard to see on the camera, but can you see that here there is a tiny little lip, there's like a little bump. I'm going to keep working on that because it's where the paper's doing its crazy thing and curling up. I've got another one coming the other side. So don't just assume that once you've stuck it, that's it, because it will try and pull away. So you're just going to spend a bit of time working your way around all of your trees, doing the same technique on each one and just pushing that down. Now, when I did this one, I was in a massive rush. Basically, I had the kiln ready to go on and I kind of slapped it all together. You'll see that my paper didn't stick all the way down the edge of my trees, which is why I then have these bright blue edges. So it doesn't ruin the piece, but actually the tree that stuck best looks nicer. It kind of has that really lovely finish, whereas these ones was a bit more slapdash. And then when we come to add our blue, it will bleed underneath. So if you're wanting it to be much more defined and your trees to really, really stand out, so similar to this one here, you do just need to spend a bit of time pushing those paper templates in there and making sure they're well and truly stuck. And do just tip your plate slightly on the side because you can see those kind of arches. There's another one there, look, that's come on up. If it's drying out too much, slightly wet your finger, pop that on the top and squish that back down again. And you'll find then it presses back in. So you're just going to work your way around, making sure that they are stuck down well and truly into your plate. This bit does take a bit of time, but I promise all of the work and the effort that goes in here is well and truly worth it at the end. So I was a bit hasty with that one and I didn't go up high enough with my water on my plate. So I'm just going to add that now while that's sticking down. And just wet my finger just to push down the edge if you've got a bit that's really not wanting to stick. You've got a bit that's really fighting against you. And then the same with the moon, wherever the moon's going on your piece. You're going to do the same with the moon, and you're going to stick that down too. Now, once they're all down, like I said before, I can't stress it enough really, because I have to say, for me, having the bleeding under the tree, it's the first thing I notice on my plate because it's not how I wanted it to be. So do just spend a bit of time going back over those, because even if you've checked them, as they're drying, that paper tries to pull away. So you just need to make sure it's well and truly stuck down.
If it doesn't stick down, the blue gets underneath, because you won't be rushing to get it straight into the kiln, what you can then do is you can just very delicately use something like a toothpick to just scrape back the blue that runs under to get yourself a straighter edge as well.
And once you've done all of that bit, just rinse your brush out, because the next thing we're going to use it for is the blue. It doesn't really matter if your water is looking a bit like murky soup. Mine looks like this, because you're just going to be mixing the blue over the black anyway, so it's not going to ruin it at all. If you did start your second pot of black, just pop the lid down on it as well, because it does dry out quite quickly. If you decided to add more than just your 3 trees and your moon, which is absolutely fine, do just remember where you've put it, because obviously if you're going to add really teeny tiny bits on here, then it's very easy to lose them, and paper, like stickers, will burn in the kiln. So when these get fired, if there's any left on there, it's going to burn, and it leaves this really horrible mark on the piece that's almost impossible to fix. So just be aware, if you have added extra bits, you might just want to take a quick photo. I know it sounds silly and you think, oh, it's my design, I know where stuff is, but it's really easy to lose bits. So if you take a photo, you can do a spot the difference before and after, just to make sure you take off the right pieces. Now, because we've broken the rules and we're now going to add a lighter colour over our black, we're not going to add water to it. So we're now coming in and working on the sky. So we're aiming for brush strokes, and we're going side to side across our plate. Now, it's going to be 2 coats, but they're going to be broken coats of glaze. So bearing in mind, you want to leave roughly where your snow zone is, just black. You don't want any of the blue coming down there. Now, obviously, if it does, you're going to get this kind of effect in the background, so it doesn't spoil it. But just keep that in mind. You're going to aim for kind of maybe halfway through the spiking of your trees to have some sort of wiggly finish when you're doing that. And you are going to go over the top of your moon paper. and over the top of your tree paper. So just be really careful when you're painting over those. If you're not at this stage yet, that's fine, but it's better if I'm just a little bit ahead of you guys and then can show you on mine before you start going with yours. So this glaze is our stroke and coat glazes. So these are the glazes that you would normally have on the table in the studio. This is number 31. It's quite a nice, bright, vibrant blue. If I'd have gone for something like 12 or 32, so our slightly more navy blues, which is how it looks on here, they would hardly have shown up. So I went much lighter to get that kind of sort of smoky evening nighttime effect. So we're going to fully load our brush again like we did the first time, but we're not adding water. And then I am just going to take a little bit of it off, because what I don't want to do is have a really big thick blob of blue. And then I will just very gently brush across my plate like this. Now it will look a bit weird, it will look a bit messy, but you're then going to get your next load and you're just going to do the same, and you're going to bring it backwards and forwards very gently across your plate. Now when you get to your trees, just be aware that you don't want to lift that paper up. I'm trying to move this so you guys can see. So I'm sort of coming in slightly wonky at the bottom. I'm not aiming to scrub over there. I'm just really lightly using the end of the brush now. I'm just going to come backwards and forwards like this. Just get a bit more on the edge. And I'm going to wait for that to dry. And then I'm going to do one more coat. So you'll notice that some bits are really kind of sparse. Some are a bit thicker when my paintbrush first started to go down, but that's going to give you this kind of finish coming in here. So obviously a thicker glaze here where you first start, and then you'll get these lovely thin strokes coming through, and it just breaks up the sky. Now it would be impossible to recreate exactly what I've done here, but that's how you're going to get that finish with these kind of sort of brush strokey sections, and then the slightly thicker, blue coming in. If you put one coat on and you love it just like that, and you think actually I don't want to add any more, then that is fine. It will work, it will still show it. You're going to have a slightly darker plate than the one that we've got on show. So once that's dry and lost its shine, you can then add another one. But what we're not aiming for is that beautiful solid finish that we had on our second coat of black. So you don't want to paint 2/3 of your plate in solid 2 coats of blue. You want it to look a bit brush strokey like this. So as mine is drying, I can see where the thicker patches are. So I'm definitely going to come in with a second coat coming across here somewhere, and maybe add just a little bit coming across, but I'm not going to add too much more to mine. So it's just a matter of getting a feel for how it's looking. So just to let you know, these bits are still shiny. Don't rush ahead and do this, but I'm just, as I say, I'm going to come in definitely over the top of this bit, because I want that to be a bit more solid around the moon. And then possibly a little bit more coming in around here. So it's very, very light strokes, very soft on the brush, not much glaze. And coming in like this. And then that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So really, really messy sky. You'll probably have quite a lot of the blue left, but that is then that section done. So once you guys have got your paper stuck and you're all happy, you're going to start doing your 2 kind of messy coats of blue across your sky. And then you can just wash your paintbrush out, because actually we're not going to use it now until we come to painting the backs later on. Christmas lights are getting in the way again. We've got lights everywhere. This bit will look really messy. So when these plates come back to me for firing, or Caroline, when yours goes over to Pip's, it's going to look very bright and quite messy, but it's only when it fires and that black comes on up through, it just softens everything off quite a lot. So I was a little bit apprehensive when it first went in the kiln because of how much blue I'd put on, but I was really, really pleased with the finish it gave me. So just to kind of bear that in mind, these bits up here do have 2 coats on. They're just 2 very sparse coats. Obviously this is a little bit thicker. You just need to bear that in mind, that that black pigment is really strong, so it will come on up through and soften that blue down an awful lot.
So, sorry, can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
So your finished one,
Yes.
was that sort of like, you know, the amount of paint that you've done the second time around, if that makes sense?
Yes, so that
Yeah.
looked like this before it went in the kiln.
Yeah, because it looks quite solid.
Yeah.
Once it's fired.
Yeah, so it's where you've got the bits, let me swap them over. So these bits here are really solid, but actually close up, you've got this kind of sponging and like sort of pocketing.
Yeah.
And there's brush strokes coming through. As it dries, it will look even more so like this section here that's drying off. So yes, you want it to look a bit blue, but you weren't ever aiming for two solid coats of that blue coming through. So yeah, it will look very blue today and until it's fired, and then it will come on through. Now, if you want yours to look a little bit brighter, bearing in mind that the moon in this image is your brightest focal point, you can make it more blue around the moon and then kind of soften it out towards the edge, because you're going to have a lot more light if it was a real photo here. So you can just kind of play with that as and when. What I did as well, when I added in this kind of line coming across, I made sure it went over quite a lot of blue that I had in the background, just so it lightened this bit up.
Okay.
But we add that in a bit later on as well.
Cool, thank you.
So the next stage we're going to get to, and I'm not rushing you, we'll all wait until we're together, is we're going to add our snow that our trees are all stood in. Now, we need our trees to stay on there in paper form while we do this bit. So they only come off later on when we then decorate the trees themselves. So we're going to leave that just as it is at the moment, and we're going to add our kind of snow in. Now, again, going back to having this black base, when you're putting a light colour over a dark colour, you would need to make sure it had at least 3 coats. Otherwise, that dark colour will come on through and it will still kind of soften the colour that you put over the top. Now, because we're going to use these little bottles here, they're a push down lid, so you push down and twist them off. They've got these little nibs on the top. So the idea is, I'll show you on here, you shake it down and give it a good squeeze to get going. You'll get these little droplets that are coming out the end. So this is what you're aiming for. Sorry, somebody's come to my door and my dog's shouting in the background. So you're going to aim for this. Now you'll see that they're quite proud. That's what we're working towards. You don't just want to just kind of show it and then move along, because that's not going to work at all. You're going to aim for these little 3D droplets, really. That's the kind of glaze that we're going for here. Now, we don't normally paint like that, and those dots are going to take quite a long time to dry. So just bear that in mind, because in a minute I'm going to explain what we're doing and then I'm handing over to you guys. So you'll then get in the zone and you'll be dotting like crazy, and it gets really quite addictive. I will make sure that the camera is on this one as well, so you guys can see what's going on. But just to bear in mind that when you're dotting, you can change the size of your dots. So this to me looks like it's quite hilly. There's kind of, you know, variation in the snow. And it's because I went along first with bigger dots and I made these wiggly lines. So I had something to work on. So my big dots went in and I added those. And then I spent ages doing little dots, just kind of filling in and following that curve so that you then end up with that kind of design. So you're just going to slowly work your way through. Sometimes your dots like to make friends with their neighbours if you've gone a little bit too close. Can you guys see that one there? That joined in and made a big blob. This one did the same. To me, it doesn't ruin it. If that happens to yours and you really hate it, you're going to have to let those dry completely. And then, like Pip said earlier, if you have any bleeding under your trees, you can take that back off with a cocktail stick and then add another dot there, or just kind of break it back round so it looks like a circle again. But this is what we're going to start doing. We're just going to start adding in our snow and doing our dots. And as I say, you're going for this kind of 3D looking dot rather than a tiny little sort of speckle with the end of the squeezy bottles there. Because it's going to be very wet and the droplets will be wet for a long time, just be really aware of where you've dotted. And I know that sounds really silly, but sometimes you can get really in the zone and you're busy painting and everything's great, and you're merrily pushing your hand or your sleeve or something through all of the lovely dots that you've done already. So try and work out, I mean, I'm right-handed, so I'll start over on the left and I'll work my way back across, but I also work over the top. So for me, don't necessarily copy how I'm doing it because I'm a little bit cack-handed. So find a way that works best for you and work away from, you know, kind of have your arm and your hand where there is nothing, basically. When it comes to doing the trees, you might find that you end up turning your plate upside down just so you're not then smudging all of the lovely white that you've done at the bottom. Now then we've got this strip coming through in the sky over here. So again, it's just a wiggly line. I just did my first line with my slightly bigger dots that come across like that. And then I just added slightly finer ones going around there. Okay, does it all make sense so far? Sort of, yes, brilliant, lovely. So we're going to keep the paper there. The reason why we do, I don't know if you can see clearly here, but these dots here are cut clean in half. These white dots come up to the tree and then they stop dead. That's the other thing you're going to aim for. When you get to your paper, don't hover away from it, otherwise you're going to end up with a black line all the way around your piece. You want to bring some of those dots over your paper, so your dot kind of half on paper and half on the black glaze, and that will give you this kind of finish when we lift this off, and it will just help highlight these tree shapes when they come off completely. All right, as I say, if you've got any questions, I think a lot of you are muted because I keep having to check you're still there. It's really silent. But if you've got any questions, either unmute and ask, or Pip's there, she's got the chat button going as well, so just let us know if you need anything. Okay, now is it better if I have that there so you guys can see what I've done rather than seeing my one now? Does that work for you? Yeah, perfect. I'll do that, and then if you need to see what I'm up to, I'll try and kind of get it in view every now and again. To get it started, sorry I didn't say, shake it right down, either squeeze it on your hand or on one of your little scraps of paper, because it does have air in it first, so you'll find it does these funny little like bubbles out the end before it gives you a proper dot. But once you've got it, you'll then hold it in that dot position and you can keep going. If you've had a break, you'll just need to kind of let it do that first until your glaze comes down properly, and then you'll just work your way along like this. Okay, so once you've worked a section, you may find that it's a bit tough on your hands. So I've got my section coming in here. Now, like I said before, I've got a few that have made friends, and they either look like Tic Tacs or funny little blobs that have formed. The best thing to do is to ignore those until they've dried completely. Then either scrape them back so that you can make a dot again with a cocktail stick, or just kind of leave them and let them be part of your design, like this one that's come through here, and we've got a few that have blended. But I just want to chat to you about when it's time to peel off the paper, because obviously if you're busy working on a section, the other section is busy drying, but it does mean that you can then start jumping around. So if you need a bit of a break on something, you can then kind of start peeling your paper off once you have surrounded it with all of your snow dots. So I specifically work this end just so I can show everyone what they need to do. Now, you don't want to go peeling these when they're really wet and shiny, because if you do, they're just going to bleed straight in. So actually these might be a little bit close. But this side, there's no shine left on them apart from on these really big ones, but they're not going to run anywhere because they've been dry enough for long enough. So the idea is, if you've got fingernails, great. If not, just your scissors or a cocktail stick if you've got one handy. But you're just going to really gently pick underneath part of the tree and then slowly peel it down and away. Now, if you pull up, it's likely to flick where any of those dots were. So just go slowly down like that. And you should find that you get this beautiful tree like this. Now, I've got a little bit of bleeding up at the top here, but actually I'm not too worried about it because I think it's going to blend in a bit with the sky. It's actually, what's happened is I haven't brought my blue really close to the edge. So if this would be an issue for you, just add a bit more blue around your tree. But this side has given me a really lovely crisp edge. Now, when it comes to doing the yellow and green on the inside of your trees, you're not going to overlap any of your colours because you want to keep that lovely crisp finish on there. So when you're doing those dots, obviously make sure that your white ones have completely dried, otherwise they'll all mix and make friends. And then you're going to keep your red and green ones on the inside of your tree only, so don't overlap that line. And you can do any design you want to do. Now, as I said right at the beginning, I went a little bit bonkers with mine because I really enjoy doing dots and I don't know when to stop. So I added all of the colours on all of the trees, but you can just do one that's in green, very simple, one that's in red and then maybe mix two, or just have them all green or all red. This is kind of over to you really, artist choice. And then what I'm going to do, once I've started doing that, I'm then actually going to come up here and I'm going to do my kind of swirly line coming in here. And then also we have got this star just to add at the top here. So I'm just going to quickly show you how I would do that. So it can go in wherever you want it to, but it goes in as quite a thick blob like this. And then with the spout not pouring any more out, I'm just going to touch the spout in and then I'm going to pull it up, but really, really gently until I make a spike. I'm going to do the same coming the other way. So I'm not adding any more glaze. I'm just pulling this out of that dot that I've made. And as you can see, it makes quite a fine point when it gets to the end of it. And then I'm just going to come out to the sides. Similarly, so nice long spikes coming out there. And then I'm just going to do some really tiny little flicks coming through in the middle here. And then that star is in and ready to do its thing. So we don't need to then do anything else to that. And when it comes to adding your moon, do that right at the end, but peel your moon off and then squeeze some of the glaze in, and then with your finger, just kind of dabble it around. Now, annoyingly, I only noticed this today, actually, when I was showing somebody else in the studio. I seem to have made a smiley face on my moon. There we've got two eyes here, a nose, and then a mouth coming in. It was just by chance. But you're going to splodge your white around, and what will happen is the black will come through on the bits that aren't as thick, and it will give it that kind of mottled effect. So it's not just a solid white blob that's on there. So the best way to do that is to squeeze your glaze on and then just kind of mix it around with your finger, dabble it a bit, and then leave that to do its thing. The last thing I added was these little snowflakes. So as you're coming in, they're either snowflakes or stars, but as you're coming in to do the end of it, just add some more just to kind of break up this sky. And again, you're just going to do those very similarly to how you've done these, but just nice, tiny, fine ones. Okay, so if you're wanting a break from white, because it can get a bit samey, you can then move on to your trees once they're surrounded, or do a little bit more in the sky, or just keep going where you are. But for those of you that have dotted bigger and perhaps quicker than me, then you're very welcome to move on ahead as and when you need to. Okay. That's it, Pip. Okay, so it is always worth just taking a step back and double checking what you've done, because you don't necessarily want to make them too busy, but you also need to make sure you've added the right amount of colour there. It's hard to imagine that it's going to change as much as it does, but just kind of bear that in mind that your colours will be an awful lot brighter on your trees, but they'll be much duller kind of in the sky, so your blue isn't going to be as
Oh, Christina, I wish I was as graceful at doing intricate dots as you are.
These ones, I've got a lot of Tic Tacs down here, and I made myself chuckle because I've made 3 snowmen down in this bottom corner, so we've got some snowmen joining up here. But yes, so when you've done this bit, obviously, as you've seen, as you're busy painting, these bigger dots especially, they take a long time to dry, so don't rush this end bit. And if you're still busy dotting, you can dot on into the night, there's no problem at all. However, don't forget that you need to paint the backs. Now, if we go flipping these now, these will all run and it will all just be a hideous mess. So my advice would be leave these as they are overnight. Obviously somewhere safe, just leave them to dry. Once they're completely dry, flip your plate on its head and do 3 coats of black on the back. So the idea is you're going to end up with no black glaze left. So you want it to be a solid black finish like this. We will foot this, so don't worry if you paint over that. It's easier actually to paint the whole thing. Make sure you get your 3 coats on there, and then do remember just to do your 3rd coat on your edge like this coming in here. Obviously do all of that, and then once that's done, you need to pop it back in the bag when it's completely dry. Wrap it up in your tissue paper or your bubble wrap that it came in, and just make sure your telephone number and your surname is on the bag for me, either the original paperwork or just handwritten on, purely because when these come through the kiln, we'll send you a text message straight away so you can get them back in time for Christmas. But as I say, now is literally a matter of waiting for paint to dry. So if you're still dotting, you can dot away, but hopefully we've covered everything now with instruction things. So it's just kind of over to you guys to finish everything off. And thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.